Howdy historians, alright, we're back. Part 3 for US Imperialism. Part 1 was me, Part 2 was some guy with some weird animations, but we gotta switch it up a little bit. It's gonna get weird if it's just me all the time. I don't know, you might even see my face one of these days. Might even throw the webcam down in the bottom, but not today. Maybe another day. Alright, so we've been talking about imperialism, we've seen the causes, we've seen the justifications. You saw a little video there on the Spanish-American War. War was really important. We captured the Cuba and the Philippines. Only took 4 months. Just to break down real quick, couple results from that war. Spain recognizes Cuba's independence. The U.S. acquires Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, Guam in the Pacific. We buy the Philippines for $20 million. And then we also upheld our end of the bargain for the Teller Amendment, and we withdrew from Cuba in 1901. Now, at the same time, we did pass the Platt Amendment in 1901, which said the U.S. could maintain a permanent military base in Cuba, and we had the right to intervene in Cuban affairs to maintain law and order, which we'll do. 1906, 1909, 1917. That'll lead to some resentment and tension with the Cubans, which will not go well when Fidel Castro then starts his communist revolution, and we have all kinds of beef with Cuba. The Spanish-American War also started some debate over imperialism. There were the pro-imperialist arguments like Teddy Roosevelt, who believed that imperialism was good. We needed the possessions to become a world power. There were religious leaders that liked to spread Christianity. There were the industrial leaders that liked it for new markets and materials. And there was a general idea, too, that if we didn't take the land, some other European country would, right? And then there were also plenty of people in the anti-imperialist camp that formed the Anti-Imperialist League, who said, listen, this imperialism violates democratic principles and is just going to force the U.S. to get entangled in foreign affairs. But overall, the Spanish-American War was really positive. The U.S. is now a world power. We've definitely got to build a canal to get through Latin America to control our Pacific and Caribbean possessions, and other nations start to recognize our power too. So Spanish-American War is a game changer. It's really the start of imperialism. Just wanted to recap some of the effects there. Now, presidential. Roosevelt, he has his imperial policy called the Big Stick Policy because his motto was speak softly and carry a big stick. It's pretty awkward, right? But we have all these political cartoons of him with his big stick and his great white fleet, right? You can see him towing his great white fleet in the top one. And then down here in the bottom, you can just see the Great White Fleet, all these different ships. We'll talk about that in a second. But what it means to speak softly and carry a big stick, get that out of here, is that he's going to let his actions speak louder than words. He's going to carry around a big bad stick like our Navy, and that is how he's going to get things done. Now, one of the first things he starts to work on is building the Panama Canal, 1904. To 1914. This was really important because we need to protect both of our coasts, and we need to be able to move our navy around and have naval mobility, and we need to be able to watch our possessions in the Caribbean and watch our possessions in the Pacific. So we finally settle on the Panama Canal. The French started it, couldn't hack it. We finally come in and we get it done. You can see here on this map that if you go all the way around the Americas, it's a 13,000 mile trip. If you go through the Panama Canal, 5,200 miles. So it's an incredibly reduced amount of time. So that way we can protect the Caribbean, we can protect the Pacific, we can protect the Atlantic coast, we can protect the Pacific coast. So this was a game changer. It wasn't easy to do construction-wise. It was an engineering feat that many people thought like literally couldn't be done. It was also a little bit of a problem because Panama actually belonged to Colombia, but we kind of created a little revolution. We tried to buy this strip of land from the Colombians for $10 million, and they said no. And there were some people in the area of modern-day Panama that had revolted against the Colombians a couple times. We kind of encouraged them to start revolting perhaps again. And then sure enough, what do you know? They start a little rebellion. We send our navy there to protect the rebellion and to help the rebels. And we recognize the new government and we build the canal. It's an absolute game changer for international economics, but also for our foreign diplomacy so we can move our navy around. So this was a huge win for Teddy Roosevelt. You know what's interesting? Today, the Panama Canal, they're saying it's not big enough. We might need to make a new one because the ships we want to move through are even wider, primarily for economic ships, not naval ships. Another big aspect of Roosevelt's foreign policy was the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. You can obviously check out the definition of it. Basically, it says we get to intervene in Latin America. It kind of just re-ups on the initial Monroe Doctrine. If there's a Latin American country that owes debt to a European country, we're going to collect that cash and send it your way. So that way European countries don't start taking over countries that owe them money in Latin America. And we're going to intervene a lot in Latin America. We're going to intervene in Venezuela, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Cuba, just to name a few, which again makes more sense when you think about the negative and kind of tension filled relationships we have with lots of countries, plural, in Central and South America. But this is really just kind of saying, like, again, step up, Europe. If you think that this big stick and this big bad navy isn't that bad, step up and try to take over a Latin American country, and we'll see what happens. Nobody does. Everybody listens because the U.S. is really growing very quickly in its international power. Whoa, get back here, you. There we go. Kind of a smaller one. Roosevelt helped to negotiate the peace treaty to end the Russo-Japanese War. So that's a war that Japan and Russia were fighting, basically for some land. So they passed the Treaty of Portsmouth, and that ended the Russo-Japanese War. Teddy Roosevelt basically negotiated it, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. So that's pretty cool. Way to go, Teddy. Now you have a Nobel Peace Prize and a weird saying. When it comes to Japan, Teddy got some stuff done with Japan as well. At this time, the United States was pushing hard to have what we called an open door policy with China. What that meant was that we wanted to be able to trade with China in all areas of China. There was this weird thing going on before this where European countries were going into China and establishing what they called spheres of influence. It was like they would carve out a chunk of China just for themselves. And be like, in these provinces, only the English can trade with China. In these provinces, only the Russians can trade with China. The United States started to flex its international muscle and said, you know what? We want you guys to just open the door to China. We want an open door free trade policy in China. And if you guys don't do this, we're going to go to war. So we started to push for this in the late 1890s, and we got it done. Roosevelt wanted to make sure Japan was cool with this and that they would uphold the open door, and they passed an agreement in 1905 where Japan pledged to keep China's door open and would not limit economic opportunities. While they were working on that, Roosevelt also passed what was called the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan, which limited Japanese immigration to the United States. Wah wah, not so great historically, but something that people along the West Coast liked at the time. And then the last little thing for Roosevelt here is the Great White Fleet. This was just a brand new naval fleet that the United States Navy made, and they were white ships, which actually, it sounds weird, but they're really hard to see. It was actually like pretty good early camouflage. So we made this Great White Fleet, and then we paraded it all around the world. So this is Roosevelt with this big stick parading the Great White Fleet all around. This is the actual Great White Fleet. It was just a new modern naval fleet, and we sold it through Asia and sailed it through Asia and around the world to show off to everybody our power, and to just reinforce how big and bad the United States was getting. And it worked. Like, other countries saw this and said, wow, we need to modernize our Navy, but also we can't mess with the United States because these guys are the real deal. And if we ever try to step up to them, they've got enough armaments, a big enough Navy, that they're going to be able to probably defeat us. So Roosevelt's really, again, increasing the power of the United States on the international scene, just like his predecessor McKinley had done, and which he had helped McKinley do, right, in the Spanish-American War. Panama Canal is the biggest one. That's so important, especially economically. We didn't even realize it at the time, but that's an absolute game changer. Okay, Taft. His thing is dollar diplomacy. What Taft wants to do is he wants to encourage investment to win allies. He figures if we give people money, if we invest in their country, help grow their economy, grow new businesses, then that's going to help everybody in the country, and then we're going to win their favor. It's actually something that the United States does a lot today. We give foreign aid, we do foreign investment, so that way your economy becomes somewhat reliant and dependent on us. And hey, if we help your economy grow, usually we're going to get along pretty good, right? If I'm going to give you a bunch of money once a week, you're going to be pretty nice to me, so I keep giving you money. So that's his idea of dollar diplomacy. We're going to invest to win allies. Now, a couple things that happened during his time in office. Oh, hold on. This thing is just so awesome. This is just a political cartoon of like Teddy controlling Taft. Like, Taft is this big, adorable sheep, and Teddy is little Bo Peep. It's creepy but awesome, and I absolutely love it because we know some of the connections that those two had together. Okay, so Latin American Division, 1909. What are we talking about there? Taft creates the Latin American Division of the State Department. What does this show us? The growing importance of Latin America. If the State Department now has a specific division related to Latin America, clearly it's something that's becoming more important because we're exerting so much influence in the area, both politically, diplomatically, and economically. All right, Nicaragua. U.S. intervened militarily in Nicaragua in 1911 and will actually be there from 1911 to 1925. There was a rebellion going on against the people in power. It was actually a pro-democracy revolution that they were trying to start against who was basically a president in Nicaragua, but we wanted to protect U.S. economic interests against the rebels, so we just kept the military there for 14 years basically to make sure that the Nicaraguan rebels would not dispose their king, their dictator. Then, Mexican Revolution. All right, so the Mexican Revolution is a relatively prolonged, pretty messy revolution. This is just something that starts to creep up during Taft's presidency. The biggest thing that Taft did is he just stationed troops along the Texas-Mexico border in 1912 to really try to protect U.S. economic interests. Wilson's going to get way more involved in the Mexican Revolution. Taft just tried to basically secure the border so that the revolution didn't spill into the United States, because it will a couple times, and it's going to happen more during Wilson's presidency, and that's going to be a problem. So Taft, we don't see a lot of specific stuff because he's doing more investing, right? We send the Marines down to Nicaragua in 1911. We create the Latin American Division. We post troops along the border, but not a lot of specifics like you saw in McKinley and Roosevelt, because again, he wants to invest. He doesn't want to like send troops abroad. And then lastly, you've got Wilson. They all have to have their little names, all these progressive presidents, right? So for him, it's moral diplomacy. This is the idea that he wants a morality to dictate what he does in foreign affairs. And the big thing he wants to do is he wants to increase democracies around the world to make the world safer for democracy. So he doesn't want to just invest. He'll do that sometimes. He doesn't want to just use military power. He'll do that sometimes. He wants to use military power, economic power, and diplomacy. Like actually, international relations, getting down, sitting down, talking to other countries to try to increase the amount of democracies around the world. Try to, talk to these other countries, get them to start democracies, see more voting, so that way the world's a better, more democratic place. Okay, so he's going to take a more moralistic approach. One thing he did is he sent his Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, to go negotiate these conciliation treaties. So Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan negotiated 29 treaties with different nations. What these conciliation treaties stated is that all these different countries would agree to try to have peace before war. They agreed to diplomatic means before military means to resolve disputes. We're really trying to show our leadership here that we should, instead of sending our armies to settle disagreements, we should send diplomats. So we're trying to be leaders in a moral sense with these conciliation treaties. So when we sign with a country, the country is saying, we promise to try to negotiate before we promise to fight. Signed 29 of them. In the Caribbean, Wilson's going to be very active. He's going to have to send the Navy to protect the Panama Canal. He's going to send the Marines to Nicaragua, Haiti, the Dominican Republic to maintain order and protect the canal and our economic interests. So he's going to be very active in the Caribbean. Also, there's going to be some flashes of heat in the Mexican Revolution. Wilson refused to recognize the government of President Huerta, and we eventually sent American forces to occupy Veracruz in July of 1914 until we basically got the president we wanted in power in Mexico. We were trying to protect U.S. economic interests. The U.S. owned 43% of Mexican land through economic activities during the American Revolution, so we wanted to make sure that we got Carranza in power, not Huerta in power. So that was something that was big for him, was protecting our economic interests in Mexico, and we occupied the city of Veracruz for a time. Now, Wilson's big imperialism stuff is going to come when we talk about World War I. He'll be the president in charge during World War I, and he's going to try to pass this League of Nations. It's not going to go so well for him, unfortunately, but we'll get more about him in Dub Dub 1. So the legacy of imperialism, it really brought the U.S. up onto a global stage. We became much more powerful. Foreign policy became something that was now a new debated issue amongst politicians, imperialism versus anti-imperialism. It's a big shift in our foreign policy too. Now we're interventionist instead of isolationist, or moving away from Washington. And there's a lot of debate over this that continues today. Overall, this was a positive impact for the United States, both in economics and diplomacy, but there's going to be a lot of debate for it. So there's your quick look at imperialism.